Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophet Speak. Today we continue our study of the first book of Samuel, Shmuel Aleph. We're about to study chapter 22. We left off the last chapter with David running from the wrath of Saul. David ran to find refuge in Gat, the city of the Philistines. In order to keep himself safe, he had to feign madness and pretend he was he was crazy because he was afraid that the king of Gath might take retribution against him. Because of course David had been responsible for the death of many Philistines. He was taking refuge in enemy territory. So clearly that wasn't a safe environment. So at this point, David needs to run. And that's what this chapter is going to begin with, David leaving Gath and trying to find refuge somewhere else. At this point, David is still alone. He's still running alone, and if we remember, and this is very important, he had received provisions in the town of Nov from the Kohanim, the priests that lived there, and the priests that had set up in Nov a sort of temporary tabernacle, a temporary mishkan, where they served God, hopefully in anticipation of the day when a final temple would be established. And if you remember, the Kohen, the head of the Kohanim, name was Achimelech. He was the one who gave David bread, provisions for the road, thinking that David was a high up official in the administration of Shaul, and there was a Doeg Edomi, an Edomite. This is a non-Jewish, an Edomite servant of Saul, who was there and watched that happen when Achimelech gave David provisions. All that is important background to understand what's about to happen in chapter 22. And before I begin, I want to point out and pay attention very closely, because in this chapter we learn about how paranoia can lead a leader or a dictator who wants to hold on to power. His paranoia and his desire to maintain his leadership at any cost, whether he should be there or not, leads him to see everything and interpret everything as if everyone is against him, as if you're either with me or against me, as if and to end up making enemies of the people that should be your friends, and so on. We see the way and we also will I'm going to point out as we go through the key difference, and we mentioned this before, but it's going to get more and more and more obvious, the difference between a leader who takes responsibility for his mistakes, and when he makes a mistake, he takes responsibility for it, recognizes it, and tries to rectify it, versus a leader who consistently doubles down. When he says something wrong or does something wrong or something bad happens that he was responsible for, instead of taking responsibility, he always blames someone else, and someone else needs to take the fall for it. These are classic characteristics that we find when we look at leadership throughout history, throughout the world. When we look at people that have dictatorial tendencies, people that have the tendency to abuse their power, those are the people that refuse to take responsibility for what they do wrong, and it generally comes from a paranoia, as if everyone is against them. And everything they see is interpreted that way. You're either with me or against me. Vayelech David misham. So David leaves Gat. So now David clearly at this point poses no threat whatsoever to Saul, to the administration of Saul. He's alone. He's wandering. He's running. He is a lone refugee. So he leaves Gat, because he's no longer safe there, and this being a madman in Gat, being a homeless guy hanging out in the gates of Gat is not exactly going to work out for too long. So he leaves Vayimolet el Ma'orat Adulam, and he runs to the cave of Adulam. This is an area where there were many caves. Still are many caves. These caves had roles to play in many times throughout history, and this is one of them. All the way down to the times of Bar Kokhba, where many years later, the fighters of Bar Kokhba hid in these caves. We would find these caves pop up several times. But here David goes to run and hide there. It's a reasonable place for a lone refugee to try to find a safe place to hide. And his brothers and his father's house heard, Vayerdu Elav Shama, and they went and they joined David there. This is very interesting because remember, in the beginning, David's brothers weren't so supportive of him being the king. Remember that his older brothers were passed over by Shmuel. When Shmuel wanted to anoint one of them king, God told Shmuel to pass over his older brothers. And remember when he went to visit his brothers when they were at war before the story of Goliath, his older brothers weren't that welcoming of David. But it seems that in the passage of time since then, David has established himself as a real, reliable, successful leader, and he has shown himself to be a genuine person, and it seems like his brothers and his family are now supporting him, which is part of the reason why Shaul became so paranoid, presumably. And if you remember, Shaul's anger was stoked when he found out that David was going back to spend time with his family. Knowing that the entire family of David is behind him, it makes David that much more powerful. Vayiskabtzu elav, so now that his family is with him, this is important, so now he can start building, he can start moving and transitioning from being a lone refugee, wandering around, pretending he is a lunatic, to being someone who's going to become a viable leader and an alternative king to Saul. Vayiskabtzu elav kol ish matzok. And all the people that were in bad shape, people that, people that owed money. So we're talking, all of the people in society that were on the lower rungs of society, the ones that were in financial straits. V'chol ish mar nefesh, anyone who had, literally, mar nefesh translates to bitter soul, people that had gripes against society, vayhi aleim lisar, and they all gathered with him in this area, Adulam. And it makes sense, these are people that are hanging out around the caves. They didn't have a place to live, they were homeless, their homes were foreclosed on by the bank, the people that lost their jobs. They all rallied around and hung around David. And again, this gives you the sense of David being a person, a leader who cared, and someone who they could look up to. And there therefore gathered around him about 400 people. So now you have David with 400 men, not exactly the strong, powerful, disciplined army or entourage, but people nonetheless, supporters nonetheless, and his family as well. From there, he went to Mitzpeh Moab. Mitzpeh Moab is the place on the Dead Sea, a high place where you look out towards Moab. Moab, which is on the other side of the Dead Sea, on the the east side of the Dead Sea, which is modern day Jordan. Vayomer el Melech Moab. And when he went there, he said to the king of Moab, he met the king of Moab. Now, Moab is a well-established enemy of the people of Israel. Moab is also, David has ancestry there, right? David's ancestor, his great-grandmother was Ruth, who was a Moabite. And so he had some family kinship to Moab, and also Moab is an enemy of of the people of Israel and an enemy of Saul. And if Moab is probably, the king of Moab is probably interested in fomenting some trouble among his enemy, because once there's fighting going on within the enemy ranks, it weakens them and it gives Moab the upper hand. So it makes sense also that David would look to Moab for some support. One, because of his family kinship, and two, because Moab is going to be an enemy of Saul. So he said to the king of Moab, "Yetzei na avi ve'imi itchem." Can my father and mother stay with you? David understood that Saul would be eventually want to take revenge against David's family. His father and mother were old and wouldn't be able to defend themselves, and he wanted them to be safe. He said, "Please take my parents, Ad Asher Eda, until I know Mayasali Elohim." So David at this point doesn't know what the future holds until I find out and I see what God does, what's God's plan here, what's going to happen with me, where is this all going to lead. Vayanchem et pnei melech Moab, and he he led them and brought them to greet the king of Moab. Vayeshvu imo, and they stayed with him. Kol yimei heyos David ba Mitzudah, as long as David remained in Mitzudah. Mitzudah is could mean like a fortress, also some sort of a rock fortress that presumably was based on what we've just read, somewhere on the west bank of the Dead Sea, and a place which when one looked across the sea, one would see Moab. And his parents were now safe on the other side of the Dead Sea in Moab, being protected by the king of Moab. Now, someone else shows up who, Vayomer Gad Hanavi, who we don't know who he was or where he came from. The verses don't tell us. But another person comes and joins the camp, who is very important to establish a true court of a king, is Gad Hanavi, God the prophet, said to David, Lo teshev ba Mitzudah, don't stay here, don't settle down here in this fortress too long. Rather, in order to continue to build your following, you need to go do as follows. Lech uvasa locha eretz Judah. You need to go and come to the land of Judah, because, and as we'll see over time, because you need to establish yourself and you need to gain a following among the people. It's fine, it's well and good. Now you have your family with you. That's very important. Now you have you have 400 people with you that'll support you, that'll fight for you and protect you. But now you need to get the people. And what we're going to see here is David is going to establish and build up the allegiance of the people of Judah to him as a leader. And in contrast, Shaul is going to concentrate on his people of Benjamin, and the other tribes. This is foreshadowing the eventual split. And I've been making this point repeatedly, that this attitude of Shaul bringing about basically this split between the other tribes and Judah is eventually going to lead, down the road, several generations later, to the split of the kingdom. And the rather than working towards unity, Shaul laid the seeds of disunity, which eventually brought about the destruction of the people many generations later. So, and this is crucial, that even though David himself did work to unify them, the fault lines were laid down, and the fault lines are made for generations. So, so now this Gad Hanavi, so the God the prophet, who we don't know his story or why he joined David, but apparently, presumably God sent this prophet to David to give him these instructions, as he just did. You need to go and start building allegiance among the people of Judah. Vayelech David, and David went, Vayavo Ya'ar Chares, and he went to the forest of Charet. Now we come to, let's go focus on Shaul. We've just told you what was happening with David. Now, what's happening with Shaul? Shaul is now living in this terrible mood of paranoia. Everything he sees about him is an enemy. Anyone that doesn't absolutely support him and his delusions is an enemy and is conspiring with David. Remember, David never conspired. David was ready to be and was a loyal servant of Saul. But Saul didn't see it that way. Everything he saw was paranoia. He thinks David is out to get him. So therefore, Vayishma Shaul heard Kinoda David that Vanashim Asherito, that David, now that he's with his family, he's meeting with the king of Moab. He has 400 men with him. It's not staying secret for too long. So the word got out that David was out there. People were gathering around him, and of course Saul interpreted this as a giant insurrection. And that he had people with him. So now he's sitting in his place. Giva was where his capital was. And where was he sitting? Tachato Eshel, underneath a tree, an Eshel tree, Barama, in a high place. Vachanito biado, and he's standing there with his spear in his hand. The spear is the symbol of his willingness and to use violence and his paranoia. He's sitting there, like as if he had a gun in his holster, ready to kill anyone who he was suspicious was trying to get him. And all of his servants were standing around him. And Shaul says to his servants that are standing around him, Shimuna b'nei Yemini, listen to me, you people of Benjamin. Now this is crucial here. So here Saul is speaking to the people of Benjamin. David is now going to his tribe, the tribe of Judah. Gam lekolchem yitain ben Yishai sadosu chamim. What is this? Did David promise you all to give you fields and vineyards? Lekolchem yasim sarei alfim sarei. Did he promise? He promised to make you all heads of his army and and generals and officers and give you commissions in his army. Is that what he's doing? David is making all these promises. Of course, this is just completely delusional. No such thing ever happened. But Shaul is imagining that David is making all these promises and building up this huge insurrection, and everyone around him is a potential enemy. All of you are conspiring against me. And what's in Saul's mind? What's the proof that they're conspiring against him? Because no one is telling me what's going on. No one told me that there was a Bichras B'ni Ben Yishai, that my own son made an agreement, is conspired with that son of Jesse, that son of Yishai. Ve'ein cholemi kemalai. There isn't a single person who is worried about me, who cares about me, and tells me what's happening. That my own son has set up a trap for me, like he has done today. So first, this is what happens with conspiracy theorists. First, he imagines that everyone's against him. He imagines that his son conspired with David to take down Shaul, which was never true. That never happened. His son was a good friend of his, but David, true. But on no occasion did his son Yonatan actually conspire to take down Saul. In fact, Yonatan and David were loyal members of Saul's court. But because he sees them, he thinks that happened, and then since he thinks it happened, nobody told him. Of course, nobody told him because it didn't happen, but in his mind, nobody told him because everyone's all with the enemy. So, therefore, he's standing there with his spear, about to take revenge on the very people who would support him. And so what happens here? Vayan doeg ha'adomi. The doeg, the Edomite, so the enemy, Doeg was an Edomite. An Edomite was another nation that was an enemy of Israel at the time, but Saul had Doeg the Edomite as one of his lead officers, and it seemed that he was almost, I've heard him compared to the head of the KGB. He was the Abir Haroim, meaning he was the strongest of the leaders, was how he was referred to in the last chapter, meaning he was a bully, and and he was ready to take action against others within Saul's administration who were perceived by Saul as being disloyal. And it's just, anyone familiar with the history of dictators and strongmen leaders realizes that that one guy who makes pretend that he's the loyal one, and he does that by doing what? By exposing all of these supposed traitors. And by exposing them, he proves to the leader his loyalty. But meanwhile, these traitors aren't necessarily traitors, or they aren't, maybe not even traitors at all. They may even actually have been good supporters. But this is what he does, and this is also classic. And Vahu nitzav alav deishol, and he was standing above the servants of Saul. It's crucial to make note of the terminology here. Al avdei Shaul. It doesn't say im avdei Shaul. That he was standing with the servant. He was standing on top of them, as if he was kind of acting as if he was the strong one, the boss of them. Vayamar, and he said, Ra'isi es ben Yishai. I was there when the son of Yishai, Ba Nove, came to the town of Nov, El Achimelech ben Achitov, to Achimelech, the son of Achitov. So he's saying, because remember, Doeg Adomi was there among the people. Vayish allo ba'Adonai. And Achimelech, who prayed, literally this means he asked God on his behalf, which means he prayed for him and prayed for his success, which is a lie. We did not see that Achimelech prayed or performed any ceremonies on David's behalf. In fact, David said, quick, I just need some bread because I'm running, right? But Seidon Nasan, and he gave him food, which is true. Any good lie needs to have some truth in it in order to make it believable. And make it even worse, he gave him the sword of Goliath, the Philistine, which is also true. But remember, when Achimelech gave that to David, he thought that he was the representative of Saul. He thought that David was there as the chief of staff in Saul's army, that one of the high-ups in Saul's kingdoms. He was being loyal to the king when he gave it to David. He had no way to know that David was somehow an enemy. So here we have Doeg trying to portray Achimelech as if he was an enemy in order to ingratiate himself with the leader Saul. Vayishlach HaMelech, so the king sent Likro es Achimelech ben Achitov HaKohen. He said, go get for me Achimelech, the son of Achitov, the Kohen, v'yiskol beis aviv haKohanim asher benov. And you need to bring his entire family, all of the members of his household, all of the Kohanim, all of the priests that live in Nov. Vayavo'u kulam el HaMelech. And all of them came to the king to be seen by the king. We get the sense this is not going to end well at all. And one of the most tragic events in, the entire Bible is about to happen. Certainly one of the most awful deeds of Saul, and just demonstrates just how low someone can fall when they become paranoid and when they're unwilling to accept responsibility for what they've done, and when they're unwilling to let go of power even when it's appropriate, and when they were told already by God and His prophet that it's time to step down and hand over the reins, but he refuses to do so, and then he becomes paranoid. It leads him to what we're going to find out soon. Next podcast is mass murder. So this is the first half of chapter 22. Thank you so much for studying this together. Looking forward to studying the rest of this chapter and, of course, the rest of the book of Samuel together.